He smelled like cedar and cold rain, and I hated that my body recognized him before my mind did. I was standing at the altar in a suit that cost more than my dignity, about to give my name to the one alpha in all of Seattle who had spent the last 3 years trying to dismantle everything my family built. And the worst part? My hands were steady, my jaw was set, my eyes were dry, because I had promised myself one thing walking into that cathedral. I would not break, not for peace, not for politics, not for him. My name is Seo Jiwon, and I have never once in my life done anything without a reason. I trained my scent glands to suppress before I was 17. I learned pack law before most Omegas my age were even allowed in the room where it was discussed. I buried my designation under ambition, strategy, and in silence so deep that half the city thought I was a beta. The other half feared me anyway. I am the only son of the Seo pack, one of the oldest Omega-led families in the Pacific Northwest. My father, Seo Minjae, built our pharmaceutical empire from a single clinic in Koreatown. My grandfather bled for the land our headquarters sits on, and I was raised to protect it, not to sell it, not to gift wrap it in white silk and hand it over at an altar to Kwon Sungho. I pressed my thumb into my palm as the organ music swelled through the cathedral, a small, private gesture. Something my mother taught me when I was 9, and crying after a packed tribunal, where my father was nearly stripped of his alpha title for sheltering Omega refugees. Feel the pain, she had whispered, pressing my small hand flat. Then let it pass through you. Don't let them see it land. She was gone now, 3 years gone, and her seat in the front pew was occupied by my aunt, who dabbed at her eyes like this was a love story. It was not a love story, it was a ceasefire. The Kwon pack had been bleeding us quietly for 18 months, cutting distribution deals, poaching our suppliers, filing injunctions against our licenses in 3 states. They were methodical, patient, ruthless in the way that only old money with new hunger ever is. And at the center of it all was him, Kwon Sungho, alpha heir, 31 years old, built like someone had sculpted him specifically to take up space in rooms that weren't his. I had seen him exactly 4 times before today, always across a negotiating table, always with lawyers between us like a buffer zone. Each time he looked at me the same way, like I was a variable he hadn't accounted for, like I irritated him. Good. The feeling was entirely mutual. The peace treaty had been my idea, actually, not the marriage, the treaty. My father's counsel had suggested a merger, a territorial agreement, a formal alliance to stop the bleeding on both sides before one of us didn't survive it. It was Kwon Sungho's father, the elder Alpha Kwon Jae-sung, who had laughed in that measured, dangerous way of his and said the only merger worth signing was a blood one. And then he had looked at me. I had looked back without flinching. 3 weeks later, I was being fitted for this suit. My father had apologized to me exactly once, in his car outside the tailor. He had stared straight ahead, his hands wrapped around the steering wheel, and said, "Jiwona, if there was another way." He had not finished the sentence. I had not let him. "There isn't," I said, "so let's make sure this one counts." Because here is the thing no one tells you about being an Omega in a world built for alphas to devour. Strength is not about never bending. It is about knowing exactly how far you can bend before you snap, and making sure you snap in a direction that still serves your purpose. This marriage would serve mine. I had conditions, written, notarized, witnessed by pack lawyers on both sides. Separate residences within the shared territory. No interference in SEO pack business operations. No public displays that were not mutually agreed upon in advance. No bonding, no marking, no biological claim of any kind. Kwon Sungho had signed every page without a word, which should have relieved me. It didn't. The cathedral doors opened, and I felt it before I saw it. His scent. Cedar. Rain. Something underneath it I could not name. Something that sat low and warm like an ember that had no business still burning. My suppressants were top-grade pharmaceutical, the same ones my family's company manufactured. They had never failed me before. They flickered, just once, just for half a second, like a light bulb deciding whether or not to go out. I locked my jaw and walked forward. He was standing at the altar in a black suit, Dark hair pushed back from his face, expression carved from something colder than marble. His eyes found mine the moment I entered, and they did not move. Kwon Sungho did not look like the ceremony continued, and Kwon Sungho still had not looked away from me. Not when the officiant read the territorial clauses. Not when the pack witnesses signed the secondary documents. Not when my aunt let out a soft, emotional sound from the third row that made half the room shift in sympathy. He just watched me, still, unblinking, like I was something he was trying to solve. I watched him back. Two could play at that. You signed the same contract I did, I thought, holding his gaze with the kind of calm that took me years to build. Separate residences, no bonding, no claim. You agreed to every word. So whatever you think you're doing right now with those eyes, Kwon Sungho, I promise you it isn't working. His jaw moved, just slightly, like he was grinding a thought between his back teeth. I almost smiled. Almost. The rings, the officiant said. Sungyun, the middle Kwon brother, he stepped forward with a small velvet box. He was quieter than Sungho, built leaner, with eyes that tracked everything and gave nothing back. He handed the box to his brother without ceremony and stepped back into position like a soldier returning to formation. Sungho opened the box. I looked down at the rings for exactly 1 second. Platinum, simple, clean. No engraving, per my request. I did not want his family's crest pressed against my skin every time I moved my hand. He picked up the smaller band and turned to me. And that was when it happened. He reached for my hand, and I gave it to him because the contract required it, and I was not going to flinch in front of 200 pack witnesses. His fingers wrapped around mine, and the contact was nothing. Formal, transactional, exactly what it was supposed to be. Except his scent hit me at full strength for the first time without a negotiating table between us. Cedar. Rain. That low, burning warmth I had caught at the door, now close enough to settle against my skin like heat from an open window in October. My suppressants did not flicker this time. They dropped. Not completely, not visibly, but enough that I felt my own scent shift at the edges, just slightly, like a door cracking open in a room that had been sealed for years. I pulled it back in less than a second, discipline snapping shut over instinct like a steel trap. But his fingers tightened on mine. Barely. A pressure so small that no one in that cathedral would have caught it. I caught it. My eyes moved up to his face, and for the first time since I walked through those doors, Kwon Sungho's expression had changed. It wasn't hunger exactly. It wasn't warmth. It was something more unsettling than either of those things. It was recognition. Like his alpha senses had caught that half-second crack in my suppressants and filed it somewhere private. Somewhere I was absolutely not invited. Don't, I thought again, and this time I wasn't talking to my heart. I was talking to him. He slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. I hated that it fit perfectly. I took the second band from the box myself because I was not going to stand here and be dressed like a doll, and I slid it onto his finger with the same calm I would use signing a business document. Clean, direct, done. By pack law and personal covenant, the officiant said, witnessed by blood and territory, this union is bound. Polite applause moved through the room like a careful wave. Sungho's hand was still holding mine. You can let go, I said quietly. Low enough that only he could hear it. He looked at me for one long beat. I know, he said, and then he did. Slowly, like it was his choice and not mine. I filed that away too. The reception was held in the grand ballroom of a hotel whose name I will not dignify with my attention, chosen by the Kwon family because of course it was. Everything about the evening was Kwon selected, Kwon arranged, Kwon branded in the subtle way that old pack money brands things, with quality and quiet dominance and not a single Seo touch anywhere except me. I was the only Seo touch. I was aware of this the entire time. I worked the room the way I had been working rooms since I was 14, and my father first brought me to pack summits. Smooth, measured, always with something warm in my expression that stopped just short of invitation. I spoke to the territorial council members. I acknowledged the neutral pack representatives who had come to witness the alliance. I accepted a glass of cold water from a passing server and drank it slowly while pretending to admire the floral arrangements, which were honestly excessive and not something I would have chosen. White peonies. Everywhere. Who approved this? You look like you're calculating the cost per stem, said a voice beside me. I turned. Kwon Sungho, the youngest brother, was standing 2 feet away with a glass of champagne and an expression that was almost amused. He was the only one of the three who looked like he knew what a smile was for. I was calculating whether the budget could have been redirected toward the legal retainer your family owes mine for the injunction filed in Oregon last February, I said pleasantly. He blinked, then he laughed, genuinely, short and surprised like I had caught him off guard. Okay, he said, I see why Sungho Hyung looks like he swallowed something difficult every time your name comes up. Good, I said. That means he's paying attention. Sungjae opened his mouth, closed it, then tilted his champagne glass toward me in a small, respectful acknowledgement before drifting back toward his family's cluster near the center of the room. I turned back to the peonies and felt, without looking, the exact moment Kwon Sungho's gaze found me from across the ballroom. My pulse did something I chose to categorize as irritation. He signed the contract, I reminded myself, thumb pressing into my palm beneath my cufflink. Every page, every clause. He agreed. The ember warmth of his scent reached me even at this distance, faint and infuriating. So why does it feel like he's already planning something I haven't read yet? I told myself I was prepared for everything. I was wrong. Because what happened when the last guest left and the ballroom lights dimmed, I hadn't planned for it all. The last guest left at 11:43. I know because I checked my watch the moment the ballroom doors closed, the way you check a timer on something you have been enduring rather than enjoying. The catering staff moved quietly through the edges of the room, collecting glasses, folding linens, pretending not to exist in that professional way that made me respect them more than half the pack representatives I had spent the evening performing for. I set my water glass down on the nearest table and reached for my jacket. The car is ready, said Cha Dong-yun, appearing at my peripheral vision with the punctuality of someone who had made a career out of being exactly where he was not entirely wanted. He was addressing me, but his eyes moved to Sungho, who was standing 12 feet away speaking in low tones with his father. My car or his? I asked. Dong-yun paused. There is one car. I looked at him. He looked back with the practiced neutrality of a man who had delivered bad news to powerful people for a living and had developed a specific facial expression for it. The hotel suite, he continued carefully. Curry was arranged as a shared space for the evening, per the alliance visibility requirements outlined in the secondary covenant. Section 4, public continuity of the union must be maintained for the first 48 hours, I finished. I know what I signed. I had written half of it. I knew exactly what it said. What I had apparently miscalculated was what 48 hours of public continuity looked like when translated by the Kwon family's event coordinator into a single hotel suite on the 42nd floor, with one living area, 2 separate rooms, and a connecting door that I was going to make absolutely sure had a working lock. I picked up my jacket. Across the room, Kwon Jae-sung said something to his son in a low voice. Sungho's expression did not change, but something in the line of his shoulders shifted, and my attention that wasn't quite discomfort and wasn't quite compliance. He said something back, short, flat. His father smiled the way glaciers move, slow, heavy, and capable of reshaping land. Then Sungho turned and walked toward me. I put my jacket on, fully, both arms, collar adjusted, because I was not going to be caught half-dressed and off-balance when Kwon Sungho crossed a room toward me for the first time as my legal pack-bound spouse. He stopped 2 feet away, the distance he had maintained at every negotiation. Habitual? Interesting. Ready? He said. I've been ready, I said, since before you finished your third conversation with the territorial council member who, by the way, was visibly bored after the first 7 minutes. You could have wrapped that up faster. Something moved across his face. Not quite amusement. Not quite annoyance. I'll keep that in mind, he said. Please do. We walked to the car without touching. The suite was exactly what I expected from a Kwon-selected property, aggressively well-appointed, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Seattle waterfront and furniture that had been chosen by someone with excellent taste and no warmth whatsoever. Everything was gray and cream and deliberately calming, which had the opposite effect on me because I knew exactly what it was designed to do. I did a full perimeter check of the living area in 40 seconds. Old habit. My father's security training, back when pack tensions ran high enough that we swept every room before settling. Sungho watched me do it. "There are no listening devices," he said from the doorway, jacket already off, folded over his arm. "My team swept it this afternoon." "So did mine," I said, completing the check. "I'm not looking for devices. I'm memorizing exits." Silence. "From me?" he asked. His voice carried no offense. Just the question, clean and direct. I turned to face him. "From any situation I haven't fully controlled yet. It's not personal." He considered this. Then he nodded once, like it was a reasonable thing to do, and he was filing it accordingly. I moved toward the room on the left, which I had already decided was mine based on its position closer to the main exit and farther from whatever cedar and rain situation his presence was generating in the air of this suite. "Jiwon." I stopped, not because the sound of my name in his voice did anything to me, purely because stopping when addressed was basic courtesy and I was raised with manners. "We should talk," he said, "about expectations for the next 48 hours. I turned. "I have a document for that. My assistant emailed it to yours 3 days ago. 12 pages, indexed." I read it. "Then we're covered." "There are things not in the document." I raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" He was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone searching for words, the quiet of someone deciding how many of them to use. "Your suppressants dropped during the ceremony," he said. The room temperature did not change. My expression did not change. But something behind my sternum pulled tight and sharp, like a wire being tested. "For approximately half a second," I said. It self-corrected. "I know. Then why are we discussing it?" "Because you should know that I noticed," he said. "And that it stays in this room." I looked at him for a long moment, measured him the way I had learned to measure alphas, who offered things that looked like consideration, but might be leverage. His face gave me nothing, just those eyes, steady and watchful, and currently very focused on mine. "I already knew you noticed," I said finally. "You gave yourself away when you tightened your grip." Something shifted in his expression then. The smallest thing, like a door opening a single inch in a very still house. "You felt that," he said. "I feel everything, Kwon Sungho. I just choose what to react to." I opened the door to my room. "Good night," I said. "Don't touch the connecting door." I closed it behind me before he could answer, and then I stood in the dark on the other side of it, back pressed to the wood, and listened to the silence stretch between us like something alive. My thumb found my palm. Feel it. Let it pass. It was taking longer than usual. I told myself it was just adrenaline. I told myself the way he said my name meant nothing. But there was one thing I couldn't explain away, no matter how many times I tried. He had noticed, and instead of using it, he had protected it. Why would an alpha who spent 18 months trying to destroy my family protect anything of mine? I didn't sleep much that night, and sometime around 3 in the morning, I realized the connecting door had a lock, but I hadn't turned it. I hadn't turned the lock. I noticed it again at 6:42 in the morning, standing in front of the connecting door in yesterday's dress shirt with a cup of black coffee I had made from the suite's overpriced machine, because sleeping had been a performance I gave for about 90 minutes before giving up entirely. The lock was a simple lever, brushed nickel. It would have taken 1 second. I had not touched it. I was still working out what that meant about me when the connecting door opened from the other side. I did not jump. I want to be very clear about that. I simply redirected my coffee cup from my mouth back to chest level in a single smooth motion and looked at Kwon Sungho with the expression I reserved for surprise board meeting agenda items. He was already dressed. Charcoal trousers, a deep navy shirt with the collar open by exactly 2 buttons, and one hair slightly damp like he had showered 10 minutes ago. He was holding his own coffee, black from the smell of it, and he looked at me standing in front of the connecting door with an expression that was carefully, professionally blank. Then his eyes dropped to my hand on the door frame, then back up. You didn't lock it, he said. Observant, I said. What do you want? Breakfast meeting, he said. 40 minutes. Both of us. My father requested it. I absorbed this information with the same enthusiasm I would apply to a root canal. Your father, I said, requested a breakfast meeting the morning after the wedding. Yes. Does your father sleep? Apparently not. I looked at him. He looked at me. Somewhere in the Seattle morning outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a ferry horn sounded across the water, low and long and unbothered by any of this. Fine, I said. Give me 20 minutes. You have 18, he said. My father is not flexible about time. Neither am I said. So you can go explain to him that his new son-in-law requires 20 minutes and a better reason to rush than family tradition. Sungho looked at me for exactly 3 seconds. 20 minutes, he said. He pulled the connecting door mostly closed but did not latch it, which I decided to interpret as practicality rather than anything else. And I went and put myself together with 17 minutes to spare because I was not going to let Kwon Jae-sung see me looking like I had spent my wedding night staring at a door. The breakfast was held in a private dining room 2 floors below, the kind of room that existed specifically for conversations that needed to feel civilized while being anything but. Round table, white linens, a window view of the harbor that was genuinely beautiful and completely wasted on the mood. Kwon Jae-sung was already seated when we arrived. Beside him sat Kwon Sungho, the middle brother with a tablet and a leather portfolio that suggested this was not going to be a croissant and light conversation situation. Sungjae was there too, slouched very slightly in his chair in a way that suggested he had also been informed of this meeting with insufficient notice. He caught my eye when I sat down and gave me a microscopic look that communicated something like, I am sorry about my family. I gave him one back that said, you should be. Jiwon-si, Kwon Jae-sung said, with the particular warmth of a man who had decided to be charming this morning and expected the room to appreciate the effort. You look well. Thank you, I said. As do you. Is there an agenda, or are we building one together? A beat of silence. Sunghyun's stylist paused over his tablet. Jae-sung smiled. Direct. Good. I respect that. He glanced at his eldest son. She reminds me of... He, Sungho said. Flat. Immediate. No hesitation. The table went very still. Jae-sung blinked. It was the most human expression I had seen on his face. Pardon? Jiwon's pronouns, Sungho said, reaching for the coffee carafe with the energy of someone making a completely unremarkable point. He, him. You've been corrected on this before. I did not look at Sungho. I kept my eyes on Jae-sung, whose composure reassembled itself in about 2 seconds, which was actually impressive. Of course, Jae-sung said smoothly. My apologies, Jiwon-si. Noted, I said, and I picked up my own coffee cup, and I did not examine what had just happened, because examining it would require me to feel something about it. And I was not doing that at a breakfast table in front of Kwon Jae-sung at 7 in the morning. The actual meeting was about territory mapping, the formal merger of Seo pharmaceutical distribution routes with Kwon Logistics Networks, a process that was going to take months and require more lawyers than I currently had patience for. Sunghyun walked through the preliminary integration timeline with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed it, and I listened. And I asked 4 questions that made him revise 2 slides on his tablet in real time. Sungjae watched this happen with visible interest. Sungho sat beside me and said almost nothing, but every time Sunghyun presented a point that touched Seo territory, I felt Sungho's attention shift to me before I spoke. Like he was watching to see what I would catch. I caught everything. By the time the actual food arrived, we had established 3 revised parameters, and I had successfully redirected a clause that would have given Kwon Logistics oversight of our Eastern distribution without a reciprocal concession. Jae-sung watched me do it. Then he looked at his son. Whatever passed between them, I was not meant to see it, but I did, because I was watching too. Afterward, as the table cleared and the Kwon brothers drifted into separate conversations, I stood at the window with my 3rd coffee and looked at the harbor. The morning had burned off its early gray. The water was flat and bright. Sungho stopped beside me. Not close. That same 2 feet. His distance. His habit. You caught the Eastern clause, he said quietly. Before page 3, I confirmed. A pause. My father wrote that one himself, he said. I turned my head just slightly toward him. I know, his language patterns are recognizable. He favors subordinate clauses that bury the operative term. Sungho looked at the water. So do I, he said. I turned to look at him fully then, because that was either a warning or a confession, and I needed to know which. His profile gave me nothing, just the clean line of his jaw, and the slight tension at his temple, and the cedar rain scent drifting at the edge of my perception. Quiet and persistent as a question I had not agreed to answer yet. Then I'll know what to look for, I said. He nodded slowly, like we had agreed on something neither of us had said out loud. And standing there at that window, 42 floors above Seattle with his family 2 tables behind us, and a merger and a marriage, and 18 months of warfare between us, I felt the first hairline fracture form in the wall I had built around this entire arrangement. Not a crack, not even close. Just the sound something makes right before it thinks about becoming one. I pressed my thumb into my palm. It was taking longer than ever to pass. I had mapped every exit in that suite. I had read every clause in that contract. I had prepared for his father's tactics, his brother's dynamics, the political theater of the whole arrangement. What I had not prepared for was the moment Kwon Sungho corrected his own father. For me, without being asked. And the terrifying part? It didn't feel like strategy. It felt like something I didn't have a clause for. It didn't feel like strategy. I kept turning that over in my mind as we rode the elevator back up to the suite. Sungho standing on his side of the space, and me on mine. The city sliding past the glass wall behind us in bright morning detail. 38 floors of silence, 39, 40. The thing about growing up in a pack negotiation household is that you learn very early to categorize every gesture, every word, every correction and concession and carefully timed pause. Once you build a taxonomy of intention because your survival, social and political and sometimes literal, depends on knowing whether someone is giving you something or setting you up to owe them for it. Sungho correcting his father had not felt like setup, which made it more dangerous than if it had. The elevator opened on 42. We walked back to the suite in the same silence we had developed over the last 18 hours, the kind that had stopped feeling uncomfortable somewhere between the ceremony and the breakfast table, and had started feeling like something else I did not have a clean word for. He held the suite door. I walked through. Standard. I went directly to the window, because the harbor view was genuinely good, and also because it gave me something to look at that was not him. I need to make a call, I said. I have a call in 10 minutes as well, he said from somewhere behind me. Then we're both busy, I said. Excellent. I heard him move toward the connecting door. Stop. Jiwon. I waited. Last night, he said, I want to be clear that what I said about your suppressants was not leverage, I said. You said it stays in this room. I meant it. I turned then, because I needed to see his face when he said things like that. Old habit. Faces are harder to control than words. He was standing in the connecting doorway, one hand on the frame, and his expression had that quality again. The door open 1-inch quality, like something was asking to be let out, and he had not decided yet whether to allow it. Why? I asked. He looked at me steadily. Because it's yours. 3 words. Completely unreasonable. Devastating in their simplicity. I turned back to the window. Make your call, Kwon Sungho, I said. He did. My call was to my father. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he had been waiting, which meant he had not slept either, which meant we were both exhausted and pretending otherwise, which was essentially the Seo family love language. Jiwon, he said. His voice carried that particular texture it only got when he was relieved and trying not to show it. How are you? Not a question, a check. Our version of, are you okay? Are you safe? Are you still you? Intact, I said. The breakfast meeting this morning was Jae-sung's opener. He buried an Eastern distribution clause in the merger framework. I caught it. A pause. He moved fast. He always does, I said. I've revised the parameters. I'll send you the updated notes. Another pause, longer. Jiwon, my father said. I wasn't asking about the meeting. I looked at the water. I know, I said. Silence stretched between us across the call, the comfortable kind that families build over years of saying hard things sideways. Sungho-si, my father started carefully. He treated you correctly, I said. So far, my father repeated, and I could hear him weighing that. Appa, I said, keeping my voice even. I went in with open eyes. You know that. Open eyes and a closed heart are not the same protection, he said quietly. I did not answer that, because the honest answer was complicated and the connecting door was not as thick as I would have liked, and Kwon Sungho's call had gone quiet 2 minutes ago. I'll check in tonight, I said. Couldn't get some rest. I ended the call and stood with my phone pressed to my chest for a moment, looking at nothing. My father was not wrong. He was almost never wrong, which had always been both his greatest quality and his most exhausting one. Open eyes and a closed heart. I had built that combination deliberately, spent years engineering it, and it had worked through packed tribunals and boardrooms and legal battles and one very long wedding ceremony. It had worked. The problem was that closed things could still feel pressure from the outside. I found the file by accident. I was not snooping. I want to be clear about that. I was using the suite's shared desk to review the revised merger notes I had sent my father, and the Kwon family's preliminary documentation was already open on the secondary monitor. I left there from the breakfast prep, and I was going to close it. I was. But the header of the third document caught my eye before I could. It was a medical brief, PAC health compliance documentation, standard for alliance mergers. I had submitted our version 3 weeks ago. This was theirs. I would not have read further except that my name was in it. Seo Jiwon, Omega designation, suppression history, initiated age 16, standard. I knew all of this. What I did not know was the annotation beneath it, a single line in the clinical shorthand that PAC medical reviewers used. I had enough compliance training to read it without a translator. Secondary bond susceptibility, elevated. Prior incomplete bond event noted. Reference Kwon file 2021-K. I read it twice. Just then I sat very still in the chair and did something I almost never do. I lost my composure for approximately 4 seconds. Not visibly. From the outside, I looked like a person reading a document, but inside something lurched sideways and caught, like a gear slipping in a mechanism that was supposed to be precise. An incomplete bond. 2021. 3 years ago. The same year the Kwon PAC began its quiet, systematic campaign against Seo interests. The same year I spent 4 months with elevated suppressant doses on my physician's recommendation for what she had described vaguely as hormonal volatility. I had been 23. I had been at a PAC summit in Portland. I had been in the same building as the Kwon delegation for 36 hours. I had never spoken to Sungho directly, not once. We had been in the same room twice, and I had felt strange and put it down to stress and conference air conditioning, but an incomplete bond did not happen from across a room. It happened from proximity, from a moment of mutual scent recognition, so brief that neither party registered it consciously, unless one of them had. I closed the document. I opened it again. Reference, Kwon file 2021-K. There was a corresponding file. My hand was very steady when I reached for the mouse. I had trained it to be. I clicked the reference link, access restricted, authorization required. I sat back in the chair, and I thought about a man who had spent 3 years dismantling my family's business from the outside. And I thought about a medical annotation that suggested he had known for those same 3 years, in that we had an incomplete bond neither of us had acknowledged. And I thought about last night and this morning, and the way he said, "Because it's yours." My thumb found my palm. The pressure did not pass, not even close. I had walked into this marriage thinking I understood every variable. I was wrong, because somewhere in a restricted file with his name on it was the answer to a question I had not known to ask. And the man on the other side of that connecting door had known the question existed for 3 years. 3 years, while his family was quietly taking mine apart. What do you do with that? What do you do when the person you agreed to a ceasefire with might have been carrying a secret that changes the entire map of the war? I needed to see that file. And there was only one person who could open it. I sat with that fact for exactly 4 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the monitor, the seconds moving in their clean, indifferent way, while I ran through every alternative and eliminated them one by one with the systematic focus my father had spent years building in me. I could request the file through official PAC medical channels. Timeline: 3 to 6 weeks, pending authorization from both PAC heads, which meant Jae-sung would know I had looked. I could have my own physician pull my medical history and cross-reference the annotation. Timeline faster, but it would only give me my half of the record. The Kwon file would stay locked. I could wait, gather information slowly, build a case before confronting anything. I was very good at waiting. But I was sitting 12 feet from the connecting door with the sound of his voice still somewhere in the room, quiet and even, because it's yours. And I had not slept, and my suppressants were at 70% efficacy because apparently proximity to one specific alpha over the course of 18 hours did things to pharmaceutical-grade chemistry that the clinical trials had not accounted for. And there was an incomplete bond annotation with my name on it that had been sitting in a restricted file for 3 years. I was not waiting. I stood up, smoothed my shirt, and knocked on the connecting door. 3 knocks. Even. Not urgent. I was not urgent. I was simply a person with a question and a documented need for an answer. The door opened in about 4 seconds, which meant he had been close to it, which I cataloged without reacting to. Sungho looked at me. He had his phone in one hand. Call clearly just ended, and his expression was its usual measured neutral. But his eyes did that thing they had been doing since the ceremony, that immediate full attention focus, like I was the only variable in the room worth tracking. There's a restricted file in your PAC medical documentation, I said. Reference 2021K. It cross-references my medical history. I need you to open it. Something moved through his face. Not surprise, not guilt. Recognition. He had been waiting for this. Come in, he said. His side of the suite was almost identical to mine in layout, but felt different in a way I could not entirely attribute to furniture arrangement. It was the scent. His cedar and rain settled into the air in a way that had nothing to do with cologne. Just him. Just the biological fact of him existing in a space for several hours. My suppressants noted it and struggled quietly. I stayed near the door. He set his phone down on the desk and pulled up the documentation on his own laptop without being asked, turning it to face me when the file opened. I read it standing up. I was not going to sit at his desk like this was a collaborative review session. The Kwon file 2021-K was 4 pages. Clinical, precise, the language of PAC medical documentation, which is designed to be accurate and completely devoid of anything that might be described as human feeling. It described a scent event at the Portland summit. Duration, approximately 90 seconds. Not mutual hormonal response indicators consistent with preliminary bond recognition. Incomplete due to physical separation before the response could complete. Notation from the reviewing physician. Subject was aware of the event in real time. Awareness classified and documented per subject's request. File sealed pending subject's discretion. Subject: Kwon Sungho. He had known, in real time. In that conference room in Portland 3 years ago, he had recognized it, understood what it was, and asked his physician to seal the record. I looked up from the screen. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, not watching the document, watching me read it, which meant he already knew every word by heart and had been watching my face instead. You were 20 feet away from me, I said. Went in a room with 40 other people. 23 feet, he said. I measured afterward. I stared at him. You measured, I said. Yes. And then you sealed the file. Yes. And then your family spent the next 18 months systematically dismantling SEO distribution networks in 3 states. His jaw tightened. The first crack in the neutral. That was my father. You're the heir, I said. You had standing to intervene. I know. Did you? Silence. The specific kind that answers questions by refusing to. I closed the laptop with one careful, controlled motion and straightened up. So let me build this picture correctly, I said, keeping my voice even the way I kept everything even, the way I had been trained to, the way that was costing me significantly more effort than usual right now. Yes, 3 years ago in Portland, you recognized an incomplete bond between us. You documented it privately. You said nothing. And while that file sat sealed in your family's medical records, your pack was taking mine apart piece by piece. Yes, he said. Low, flat. Not a defense, just confirmation. Why are you telling me yes like it's a complete answer? Because it's the true one, he said, and I'm not going to dress it up. I looked at him for a long moment. The harbor light was coming through his windows at a low afternoon angle, catching the edge of his profile, and he looked like something out of a painting that someone had titled something appropriately grim. I want to be very angry right now, I said. I know. I am angry. I know that too. Then why, I said, and my voice dropped despite itself. Not soft, I'm just quieter. Do you look like you've been waiting 3 years to finally just tell someone? The question landed differently than I intended, or maybe exactly as I intended. I had stopped being sure which was which around hour 20 of knowing this man. Sungho uncrossed his arms. He moved to the window and stood with his back to me for a moment, looking out at the water, and I watched his shoulders settle into something that was not quite relief and not quite surrender, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. Because I have been, he said quietly, waiting. Not to confess, just to stop carrying it alone. The room did not change. The light did not change. The sound of the city below went on in its indifferent way. But something in the air between us shifted, subtle as a barometric drop before rain, and I felt it move through my chest like the first breath after holding it too long. I did not forgive him, not even close. I had an incomplete bond annotation and 3 years of corporate warfare sitting between us like a canyon. But I stayed in the room, and I moved slowly to stand beside him at the window. Not close, that same 2 feet, his distance, except this time I was the one who chose it. We stood there looking at the water together, and I let the silence be what it was. Not comfortable exactly, but honest. The most honest thing that had happened between us yet. After a while I said, "You're going to tell me everything in that file, every detail, every decision." "Yes," he said, "and then I'm going to decide what it means." "That's fair," he said. "It's not about fair," I said. "It's about me needing the complete information before I make any more moves in a game I didn't know had this many pieces." He turned his head and looked at me, and there was that door again, open more than 1 inch now, and behind it something that looked uncomfortably like relief and grief occupying the same space. "You're not what I expected," he said. "No one ever is," I said. "That's usually their first mistake." His mouth moved, not quite a smile, something quieter than that, something that felt like it didn't get used often. I looked back at the water, my thumb pressed into my palm. This time I did not wait for it to pass. Standing there, I thought I finally had the full picture, the incomplete bond, the sealed file, the 3 years of silence. I thought the hard part was behind us. I was so completely wrong. Because what I did not know yet, what none of those 4 clinical pages mentioned, was why Sungho had let his father run that campaign without a word. And when I found out the reason, it was not going to feel like relief. It was going to feel like the ground disappearing. It was not going to feel like relief. I had said I needed everything, every detail, every decision. And Sungho had said yes with the kind of quiet that meant he had already decided to give it before I asked. So we sat. Not at the desk, not at the window. On opposite ends of the gray couch in his living area, a full cushion of space between us, the Seattle afternoon going gold outside the glass, and he talked. He talked the way someone talks when they have rehearsed a thing so many times in their own head that saying it aloud finally feels less like confession and more like reading from a document they have already memorized. Careful, precise, no unnecessary words. The campaign against SEO interests had begun, he said 8 months before Portland. I went still. 8 months before I stood 23 feet from him in a conference room and felt something crack open in my chemistry that I spent 4 months medicating away. Your family's Eastern distribution network, he said, was identified by my father as a strategic acquisition target 18 months before any public action. He had been building the case quietly. By the time of the Portland summit, the first injunctions were already drafted. I know the timeline, I said. I lived it. What you don't know, he said, is that after Portland, I went to my father and told him to stop. The afternoon light moved across the floor between us. He didn't, I said. No, because you told him about the bond. A pause. Because I made the mistake of telling him there was a personal reason the campaign should be reconsidered. I did not give him details. I did not need to. My father is very good at reading what people don't say. I processed this. So he knew, I said slowly, that there was something between us, and he accelerated. Sungho's jaw was tight. He saw it as leverage. If he could weaken the Seo pack significantly enough, any alliance, any bond, any merger would happen on Kwon terms. Entirely. With no negotiating position left on your side. The room was very quiet. I heard what he was not saying, the door swinging open whether I wanted it to or not. The campaign, I said, each word landing separately, was partly designed to make sure that if we ever ended up bound, I would come to the table with nothing. Sungho did not answer, which was its own answer. I stood up, not dramatically, not in a way that knocked anything over or raised my voice. I simply stood, because sitting felt suddenly impossible, and I walked to the window, and I looked at the water, and I breathed. In, out, even, controlled. My mother's voice, feel it, let it pass. It was not passing, because here was the complete picture now, all the pieces arranged where I could see them. The incomplete bond in Portland, Sungho going to his father, Jae weaponizing that information. 118 months of injunctions and distribution cuts and supplier poaching, all of it potentially seeded by the moment his son recognized an Omega 23 feet away and made the mistake of saying so. And Sungho had let it happen. He had not stopped it. He had objected once and then stepped back and watched his family spend a year and a half quietly bleeding mine while carrying the knowledge of what existed between us like a private weight. You let it continue, I said. My voice was even. That was important. I needed my voice to stay even. After your father refused, you did not escalate. You did not go to the Pack Council. You did not warn us. No, he said. Why? A long silence. The longest one yet. Because I thought, he said carefully, that if the campaign succeeded on my father's terms, at least you would be safe. Financially diminished, but not destroyed. And the alliance, whatever form it took, would still create a barrier between SCO territory and 3 other packs that had been watching your eastern routes for longer than my family had. I turned from the window. You thought you were protecting us, I said. I thought I was containing the damage, he said. It is not the same thing, and I am aware of that. Containing the damage, repeated, by doing nothing while your family took a year and a half of work from mine. Yes, and you didn't think I deserved to know any of this. I thought knowing would make it worse. For who? He looked at me directly. For you. And there it was, the thing that broke the carefully maintained surface of the last 36 hours. Not malice, not strategy. The specific, devastating condescension of someone who had decided they knew better than I did what I could handle. My hands were very still at my sides. Let me be extremely clear, I said, and my voice was quiet in the way that my father's voice got quiet when he was at his most serious. The kind of quiet that filled a room rather than leaving space in it. I have spent my entire life in rooms where people decided what I could and could not handle because of my designation. I have been managed, protected, and strategically excluded by people who believed they were doing me a kindness. My own Pack Council did it. My father's advisors did it. And I have spent every year since I was 17 dismantling every single one of those assumptions about what an Omega can be trusted to know. I took one step toward him. Chonai, you had information that directly affected my family's safety and my personal biological history. You made a unilateral decision to withhold it because you thought you knew better. And you dressed it up in the language of protection. He was on his feet now. I had not seen him stand. He was just there, upright, and his expression had finally broken open past all the careful neutral, and what was underneath it was not defensiveness. It was shame, raw and unguarded and clearly not something he had planned to show me. "You're right," he said. "I know I am," I said. "I'm sorry." "I know that too," I said. "And it doesn't fix it." His throat moved. "No, it doesn't." We stood 3 feet apart, closer than we had been since the ceremony. And the cedar rain scent of him was very present, and my suppressants were doing their compromise best, and none of that mattered, because I was furious, and he knew it, and he was standing there, taking it without deflecting, and somehow that made it worse, because it would have been easier if he had argued. It would have been easier if he had been who I originally thought he was, cold and strategic and purely political, a Kwon asset in a good suit with an agenda. Instead, he was standing in front of me with his father's decisions and his own failures laid out between us like broken things, and he was not asking me to forgive any of it, just to know it. "Get out of my sight for a while," I said quietly. He nodded once. He walked to the connecting door and stopped with his hand on the frame, his back to me. And for one moment, neither of us moved. "I would have told you," he said. "Eventually. I want you to know that." "Eventually," I said, "is a word people use when they mean not yet and hope you won't notice the difference." He had nothing to say to that. He went through the door. I stood in his room alone with his scent in the air and the water going dark gold outside the windows, and the connecting door pulled almost closed, and I pressed my thumb into my palm so hard it left a mark. Feel it. It did not pass. It sat in my chest like something with weight and teeth. Not just anger, though there was plenty of that, but something older and more complicated underneath it. The recognition that I had been right to build every wall I had, and the far more inconvenient recognition that somewhere in the last 36 hours, he had already found the ones I had forgotten to check. I told myself the anger was clean. I told myself it was simple. But the worst part about finally having the whole truth is that sometimes it doesn't make things clear. Sometimes it just shows you exactly how complicated the person you're furious at actually is. And that is so much harder to survive than a villain. What do I do now? What would you do? Because the next move I make, it changes everything. I stood in his room for 6 more minutes after the connecting door pulled almost closed. I counted them. Not because I was waiting for something to happen, but because I needed the time to be deliberate rather than reactive. And there is a significant difference between those two things that most people learn too late. My father taught me that a decision made in the first 60 seconds of anger is almost always the wrong one. "Wait," he used to say, "not forever. Just long enough for your intelligence to catch up with your emotion. 6 minutes." Then I walked back to my side of the suite, sat at the desk and opened my laptop. I pulled up every Kwon Sungho merger document, every injunction filing, every distribution clause and territorial amendment from the last 18 months. I laid them out across 3 windows and I read them again, not for content this time, but for pattern. Because Sungho had said his father saw the incomplete bond as leverage, had used it to accelerate the campaign, had designed the pressure to ensure that any eventual alliance would happen entirely on Kwon terms. But the merger documents in front of me told a different story. I had caught the Eastern Distribution Clause this morning and called it Jae-sung's language. That was true. But 3 of the other revised clauses, the ones that had created the most breathing room for Seo interests, the ones I had quietly noted as unusually balanced for an aggressive PAC acquisition play, those had different structural fingerprints, subordinate clauses that buried the operative term. Sungho had told me that was his pattern. He had also told me he liked to bury things. I had taken it as a warning. I was now looking at the possibility that he had buried something else entirely. I cross-referenced the filing dates. The 3 balance clauses had been inserted into the merger framework at the revision stage, 4 weeks before the wedding, after the alliance had been proposed. After Jae-sung had made his blood merger comment and looked at me. After Sungho had been in the room. I sat back in my chair. The anger was still present. I was not going to pretend otherwise. He had withheld information that was mine by every biological and ethical measure. He had watched his family conduct a campaign against mine while carrying a secret that contextualized all of it. That was real, and it sat in my chest with full weight. But I was also someone who followed evidence where it led regardless of whether the destination was convenient. And the evidence was suggesting that somewhere between Portland and this hotel suite, Kwon Sungho had been doing two things simultaneously: failing to stop his father and quietly and visibly, without telling anyone, softening the impact where he could, which did not make it right. But it made it human. I closed the laptop. I sat with that for a while, the specific discomfort of having to hold two true things at once that pulled in opposite directions. He had failed me. He had also, in his limited and insufficiently transparent way, tried to protect something. Not loudly, not effectively enough. But the attempt had been there, buried in document revisions. Like everything else, he apparently did not know how to say directly. The question was not whether I forgave him. Forgiveness was not on today's table. Forgiveness required time and demonstrated change, and more than 36 hours of data, and I was not in the business of granting it wholesale to anyone, alpha or otherwise. The question was what I did with the complete picture now that I had it. I picked up my phone, not to call my father, not to call my lawyer. I sat with it in my hand for a moment, and then I put it back down, because the next conversation I needed to have was not going to happen through a screen. I stood up, straightened my shirt, rolled my sleeves down, and buttoned the cuffs because armor is armor in whatever form it takes. Then I walked to the connecting door and knocked twice. "Come in," he said. He was at his own desk, laptop open, and he looked up when I entered with an expression that had been carefully reassembled into neutral, but had clearly been something else before he heard my knock. His eyes moved over my face the way they had been doing since the ceremony, that immediate cataloging, except now I understood it differently. He was not trying to solve me. He was trying to read whether I was all right, which was its own complicated thing to sit with. "I went back through the merger documents," I said. He waited. "The Eastern clause was your father's," I said. "The 3 balanced revisions in Section 7 were yours." Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, careful attention. "You buried them," I said. "In your own language, where your father would read them as standard structure and not look twice." "Yes," he said. "You were trying to offset the damage." "I was trying," he said, "to make sure that whatever happened, you still had ground to stand on." I looked at him steadily. "That is not the same as stopping it." "No," he said, "it isn't. And you understand that the distinction matters." "I do." "Good," I said, "because I need you to understand it completely before I say what I'm about to say." He closed the laptop, gave me his full attention with the totality that I was learning was simply how he operated, all of it or none of it, no partial focus. I pulled the chair from the corner of the room, turned it to face him, and sat in it, deliberately, taking up space the way I had learned to take up space in rooms that were not built for me. "I am not forgiving you today," I said. "I want to be completely clear about that. What you withheld affected my family and my autonomy, and those are not small things." "I know," he said, "but I also looked at the evidence," I said, "all of it. And I am not someone who ignores evidence because it complicates a narrative I had already decided on." He was very still. "You made the wrong choice in Portland," I said, "and you made insufficient choices for 18 months after it. And you should have told me everything the moment this alliance was proposed, not waited for me to find a restricted file on an open monitor." "Yes," he said. Each agreement landed like something he meant rather than something he was performing. "However," I said. He did not move. "You also spent 4 weeks quietly building me a floor inside a document your father designed as a trap. And this morning at breakfast, you corrected your father's pronoun without being asked and without making it a moment." I paused. "Those things are also evidence." The room was very quiet. "So here is my choice," I said. "I am not leaving this alliance, not because I cannot. My lawyers would have me out of the secondary covenant within 60 days if I directed them to try. I am staying because the SEO pact needs this territorial buffer, and because I do not make decisions based on anger when I have access to better information." "Jiwon," he said, and my name in his voice had a different quality now, something stripped of its careful distance. "I am not finished," I said. He closed his mouth. I am staying, I said, and you are going to operate with full transparency from this point forward. Every document, every conversation with your father that touches Seo interests, every decision that exists anywhere near the boundary of what affects me or mine. I find out, or I walk, and I take the Eastern Territory with me on grounds of covenant breach. Agreed, he said immediately. Sonar, I have not finished. He almost smiled, almost. The incomplete bond, I said, keeping my voice level, is a biological reality that neither of us chose. I am not going to pretend it does not exist. I am also not going to let it make decisions for me. What happens with it, if anything happens with it at all, will be on my terms and my timeline. Do you understand that? Completely, he said. I stood up. Then we have a working framework, I said. He stood too, and we were 3 feet apart again. That recurring distance, and his scent was cedar and rain, and that low warmth that my suppressants had officially given up, pretending not to register. Jiwon, he said quietly. I waited. I'm glad you found the file, he said. I want you to know that. And I had been trying to find a way to tell you since the ceremony. Next time, I said, gathering every ounce of the dry composure that had kept me alive in rooms like this for years, lead with the restricted medical document. It saves time. He looked at me for a long moment, and then Kwon Sungho, cold and dominant and supposedly untouchable, let out a single quiet sound that was unmistakably a laugh. Short, low, real. I turned before he could see what that did to my face and walked back through the connecting door. I left it open behind me. I had made my choice. Clear terms, open door. No forgiveness yet, but no retreat either. I thought that was the hardest part. I thought I had finally steadied the ground beneath us. But I had forgotten one variable, his father, and what Kwon Jae-sung did next. It made everything I had just decided feel like it was built on sand. His father moved that same evening. I was back at my desk reviewing the transparency framework I had mentally drafted when my phone lit up with a call from my father's chief legal counsel, a sharp, precise man named Park Hyun-woo, who only called after business hours when something was actively on fire. I picked up on the first ring. They filed Inun, he said. 2 words. Enough. Which clause? I said. The original Eastern Distribution Override, the unrevised version. Jae-sung submitted it directly to the Pacific Northwest PAC Council 40 minutes ago, bypassing the merger committee entirely. He's citing a legacy territorial rights provision that predates the alliance agreement. I was already standing. That provision was superseded by the secondary covenant we signed yesterday. He's arguing the covenant is invalid, Hyun-woo said, on grounds that the bonding clause was not fulfilled. I went completely still. The contract specified no bonding, I said. That was agreed and signed. He's arguing, Hyun-woo said carefully, that the absence of a completed bond renders the alliance ceremonial rather than legally binding under old PAC law. It's a technical argument. It's also not entirely without precedent. I set my phone on the desk without ending the call, walked directly to the connecting door, and knocked once. It opened before my second knock landed. Sungho was already holding his own phone. His expression told me he had received the same information from a different source approximately 30 seconds before I had. And your father on, I said. I know, he said. He just tried to invalidate our entire alliance through a legacy bonding clause loophole. I know. Did you know he was going to do this? His eyes met mine directly. No, and that is the truth. I held his gaze for 3 full seconds, running every read I had developed on this man over the last 48 hours against his face right now. The open expression, the absence of deflection, the specific quality of his stillness that I had learned was not coldness, but contained feeling. I believe you, I said, which means we have approximately 2 hours before the council reviews the filing, and we need a response that closes this permanently. Agreed, Hatirai, he said. I have one option, I said. You are not going to like the setup, but you will understand the logic. He waited. Shira completed bond, I said, makes the alliance uncontestable under every version of PAC law, old and current. It also removes the loophole your father just tried to drive a territorial claim through. The suite was very quiet. Jiwon, he said. His voice was low and careful, and something underneath it was not careful at all. That is not a small thing. I am aware, I said. I also told you this morning that anything involving the bond happens on my terms and my timeline. Yes. I am setting the terms now, I said. This is my choice, not your father's endgame, not the contract, mine. He looked at me for a long moment. Something was moving through his expression that I did not have a clean word for yet. Something that lived in the same neighborhood as the quiet laugh from earlier, but ran much deeper. Are you certain, he said. Kwon Sungho, I said. I have been certain about exactly 3 things in the last 48 hours. The Eastern Clause, the document revisions, and this. Do not make me repeat myself. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of me, close enough that the cedar rain warmth of his scent settled fully against my skin for the first time without a table or a ceremony or a carefully maintained 2 feet between us. And my suppressants made one last professional attempt before quietly standing down entirely. His hand came up slowly, not to my shoulder, not to my arm. He raised it to my jaw, barely touching, the way you handle something you are afraid of damaging. Shamara and his thumb traced once along my cheekbone with a gentleness that was completely disproportionate to every version of this man I had prepared to marry. I need you to know something first, he said quietly. Then say it, I said. Portland was not the beginning, he said. I had seen you twice before that. At PAC Council reviews. You were 21 the first time. You argued a territorial boundary case for your father in front of 7 Alpha Council members, and you did not flinch once. I looked at him. I went home, he said, and told my brother that the ESCO PAC had someone extraordinary, and that my father should not underestimate them. And then your father spent 3 years trying to dismantle us, I said. And then my father spent 3 years trying to dismantle you, he said. While I looked for ways to stop it, that did not require me to explain to him why I could not be objective. Because I was not objective. Not after Portland. Not after I understood what the bond meant. I was quiet. I handled it badly, he said. I chose containment over honesty, and I chose it repeatedly, and I will spend whatever time you give me making that right. His thumb was still against my cheek, barely there. But I need you to know that none of it was indifference. Not one day of it. Something in my chest that had been pulled tight for 48 hours, for 3 years, for longer than that if I was being completely honest, released. Not all the way, not without condition, but enough to breathe differently. You have terrible communication skills, I said. Yeah, he said. We are going to work on that. Yes, he said again. And there was that almost smile closer this time. After we dismantle your father's filing, I said. Obviously, he said. I reached up and took his hand from my cheek and held it, not letting go, just held it with the same steadiness I held everything. And I looked at him with open eyes and a heart that was making its own decisions, regardless of what I had planned for it. My term, I said. Your term, he agreed. If this mark means something, I said quietly, it means something. Not a legal maneuver, not a ceasefire signature. Something. His hand tightened around mine. It means something. It has meant something for 3 years. Then do it properly, I said. Or not at all. He did it properly. The bond settled over me like the moment after a long storm when the air goes clean and still, and everything is sharper than it was before. Not overwhelming, not the loss of self I had spent years fearing designation-related bonds would mean. Just clarity. The specific clarity of a thing finally being what it actually was, instead of what everyone around it had been pretending. I felt him through it, cedar and rain and that deep ember warmth, and underneath it, something I recognized because I had felt its echo in myself for 3 years without a name for it. He had been carrying this the whole time. So had I. We sat together on the gray couch afterward, my shoulder against his hand still holding mine with that careful grip, like he was still afraid of damaging something. And I let him. Yeah, the Seattle night had settled full outside the windows. The harbor lights scattered across the dark water, like something someone had arranged deliberately. Your father's filing, I said. My legal team is already drafting the response, he said. Completed bond, witnessed and documented. The legacy clause is closed. Good, I said. A pause. Jiwon, he said. Still here, I said. I felt him exhale, something releasing in him the way something had released in me. The specific weight of a thing carried alone for too long, finally being set down. My father is going to be difficult, he said. Your father, I said pleasantly. Arish is going to find that his new son-in-law has memorized every subordinate clause in every document his pack has filed in the last 4 years and has a lawyer who does not sleep. Sungho was quiet for a moment. He's going to hate that, he said. Deeply, I agreed. This time the laugh was not short. It was low and warm, and it stayed in the room, and I felt it against my shoulder where we were sitting, and I did not move away from it. I looked at the harbor lights. I pressed my thumb into my palm. Old habit, old reflex, but this time there was nothing to let pass. For the first time in longer than I could accurately calculate, there was nothing I needed to survive. Just this, the water outside and his hand in mine, and the clean, settled truth of a bond that had been waiting 3 years for both of us to stop being afraid of it. My mother's voice came to me quietly the way it sometimes did in the moments between things. Feel it. I did. I let it stay. They said this marriage was a ceasefire. They were wrong. It was a beginning. And I, Seo Jiwon, had written every term. Like, comment, subscribe, and click on the notification bell. Thanks for watching.